Alright, so this video will be Introduction to Excel VBA Programming. We'll be going over main concepts that we need to basically read and write from our spreadsheets. So to get started, we need to make sure we have our Developer tab activated. If you don't have the Developer tab, you will have to go under File, Options. Under Options, we're going to go under Customize Ribbon. And here under right, we should get this little checkbox for developer right here. If it's unchecked, we want to make sure we check this. So I'm going to go ahead and check this, hit OK. So now we should see this developer tab right here on top. So if I click on that developer tab, all the way on the left, we'll see Visual Basic. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it's going to take us to our Visual Basic project screen. So here you're going to see different projects. Right now you can see I only have one. Now you may have more than one. It really depends on how many files and add-ons you have open at the same time. So let me show you something. If I go back and just create another file. So now I have two Excel files. I have this book 3 and I have this book 2 in the background. So if I go to Visual Basic now, you'll see I have two projects. I have the book 2 and book 3. So however many files you have, it's all going to be showing up here. And if you have any add-ons loading, you might have those as well. So basically you want to find the one that's matching your file name. My file right now is called book 2 right here. So that's the one I need to find. Book 3, not good. I'm going to open book 2. This is the one. And here I'm going to see my project. Two objects here. One is the workbook, the file, you could say, and the worksheet that's currently available in this workbook is sheet 1. If you had more worksheets, you would see those as well. So let me just show you that quickly too. If I add a couple of worksheets here, if I go back here, see now I have sheet 1, sheet 2, etc. So to be able to write some code, we need to create a module. So to create a module, we're going to go under Insert, here on top, and go under module, and this thing is going to pop up. So it's probably worth to mention that it's possible that in some cases this project explorer window on the left might be closed. So if that's the case and you can't see this, you may have to just bring it on. So you do it by going under view, and here you do this project explorer. So basically clicking on this will make sure you get this panel on the left. So now that I did insert a module in here, you can see there's this modules and module 1. And if you don't want this name, you can rename this right here below. So if I click on that module, I can go here and rename this. So I'm going to call it Learn. That's that. Whatever name you want to call it. You're not going to be able to add spaces in these names or special characters. So anything else is fine. I'm going to go here now in this right side of the screen. It's going to open the module where we can actually write some code. So to start a new what's called a subroutine, you have to type the word sub and then the name of the subroutine. You can give any name, just no spaces, no special characters. So I'm going to call this one Learn Basics. I'm going to hit enter. And once you hit enter, you'll see this parentheses will pop up automatically and this end sub will show up as well. So basically this is the beginning of our subroutine. This ends that particular subroutine. If you're somebody who recorded macros before, when you record a macro, it will basically create a subroutine. So you can call this your macro, I guess. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag this window to the right a little bit like this. So I can see the code and I can see Excel in the background as well. So let's try to write some things to our Excel spreadsheet. So the first thing you need to understand is the structure of our Excel spreadsheets. The first level, when we open Excel, we could just open Excel brand new with no files open, and that would just open Excel application. And then in that application, you could open a file, so a workbook. So files are called workbooks in Excel. Inside of a workbook, we have these different tabs. The official name for this is sheets or worksheets. And in each one of these worksheets, we have cells or ranges. So cell would be an individual cell, so this one cell, etc. We can also have a range. A range would be like a range. So if you did something like A1 through I15, that's a range. A range can also be a single cell. So if we think about like E8, that would also be a range, despite of the fact that it's just a single cell. So now that we know that structure, let's go back to our module and start writing something using that structure. So if I think about my Excel software, that would be my application. So I'm going to write application. Then I'm going to do period. So now you can think about this periods. If you're just starting with programming, you're not a programmer, you can just think about it inside of this thing, I have this, right? So inside of my application, which is my Excel, I can have an open workbook. So that open workbook would be the one that you're currently on, should be the active workbook. So if I just type active workbook, see, I get all this autocomplete that helps me to show what's in this. So active workbook is one of those. So I'm going to choose that. Now, if I want to get inside of that workbook, I'm going to go dot again. And inside of that workbook, we have our worksheets or tabs. If I want to get to the one that's currently active, I can get to active sheet. Now, that would refer to this active worksheet that's currently open. Now, inside of that active worksheet, we can refer to ranges or cells. So if I want to refer to a range, I can just type range. And then in parentheses, I'm going to provide the range as string text. That's going to go in quotations. So I'll do something like A1 colon B4, close parentheses. So that would refer to the range that I'm selecting right here. Now, with that range, if we press dot, it's going to be what we can do with this particular range. So one of the things in that range is the value of that range. So the value is basically what's in the cell. So if I do value equals to and type 55, it's not going to do anything until we run this. So if I go ahead and click on this run while being inside of the subroutine, it should run this code and you should see how it will basically just type 55 from A1 through B4. So let's do another one. So I'm going to just copy this because most of this is going to be the same. So like I said, a range could be a range. It also could be an individual cell as a range. So if I type something like E2 and change the value to say 9, if I run this code, you'll see it's going to put 9 in that E2 cell. So that's one way to refer to Excel cells. The other way to refer to Excel cells is using a cell. So if I just repeat this first part by basically getting my application and then active workbook and active sheet, inside of that active sheet, we can refer to cells object. With cells, you do the index. There is no A1, A2, B6. That Excel notation is not going to work here. So what do you do if you wanted to write something to, let's say, B8 cell? You would type the row number first, 8, comma, and then you provide the column number. So B is the second column in our workbook. So if I do 2, that will be the second column. And now I'm going to do the value of the cell should be whatever I want the value to be. If the value is not a number, it's text, you provide it in quotes. So I'm just going to say something like hello. So now if I run this piece of code, you'll see it's going to add hello in this cell. It's important to understand that it's not just running this, it's running all of these lines. But because we already have something in them, we can't really tell something is happening. So right now, if I just go here and clear this whole thing and go back and run this same code, you'll see it's doing all of those things. So most of the time when you look at VBA code, you will probably not see this application.activeWorkbook.activeSheet and all of that. You will probably see something that just looks like this. So for example, range F3, value equals to 9. If I run this code, you'll see that it will still go to F3 and add 9 in the cell. So when you don't provide the workbook, the worksheet, and the application, all of that, it by default is going to assume the application is Excel application, our active workbook, and our active worksheet, and then we're going to write to that cell F3. So right now, if I just go in the background and open a different worksheet like sheet 3, and I go back and run the same code, it's going to assume that's our active workbook, our active worksheet, and it's going to just put all these things in our active worksheet. So it's not really necessary to prefix this whole thing in front, although that would be full notation. So we could do that by also doing cells exactly the same way. So if I did something like 10-1, so that's 10th row and first column, do something like hi, that should still write that to that cell. How do we now write to a different worksheet? If I go back to that same application, dot active workbook, and inside of this active workbook, instead of selecting my active sheet, which would refer to the currently open tab, I'm gonna do sheets to get to my sheets collection, and from here I'm gonna select the worksheet that I want to write to. So I'm gonna say sheet 2, for example. That's the name of the worksheet in quotes as strings. So that would refer to the second worksheet in a background. So inside of that, I'm gonna basically just repeat the rest of this like this. And let's just do a different cell, I guess A1. And I'm gonna make that 88. So this way now, instead of writing to the active sheet, we're writing to sheet 2. So if I run this code, all of these lines above will refer to our current worksheet. So if we go to, let's say, sheet 4, that will be the current one, with exception of this line, which should write to sheet 2. So if I run this code, all of these should go to our active sheet. But this one, which should make the A1 to 88, is gonna do only on sheet 2. So if I go to sheet 2, see we have 88 in that cell. You can also refer to your worksheets using their index instead of using their names. So for example, if I do something like 4, if I run this code, so now see this is my active worksheet, which is gonna run most of this on it. But this one, well, I guess that's the same cell, so let's actually try something different. Let's do like B2 equals to number. So now if I run this again, see B2 doesn't equal to that text, which says number. But if I go to sheet 4, it says number, not because that's sheet 4 as the name of the worksheet. Now I could rename this to anything I want and remove that number out of here. If I run this code again, go to like sheet 1 and run this code, see it's still not doing anything here. If I go to this one, we'll see it's a number because it's the 4th worksheet. Now, if I take this worksheet and move it here, now sheet 3 is our 4th worksheet. So I'm gonna remove this number out of here and go back and run this code again. And now if I go to sheet 3, number in here. So that's basically the position. So 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th worksheet. So a couple of ways you can refer to your sheets, either by the name of the worksheet or by the index, starting with number 1. Similar to how here we don't have to do this application active workbook active sheet to refer to our current one, we also don't have to do it for this. So if I don't specify that this needs to go to my active workbook in my application and just write this code like this, that will also do the same thing. It will assume it's supposed to do it in our active workbook. So if you don't specifically mention something, it just writes to the active one. Now let's try to also refer to a different workbook. Now right now, if you look, I have this book 2 that's currently open. That's the one that I'm working on. And I also have this book 3, which is the one open in the background. So I have basically a couple of them. Let's now go to our book 2 as our active workbook. I'm gonna try to write to the book 3 from my code. I'm gonna start by, again, we can do application, or you probably guessed we can also skip this part because it's automatically going to assume that application is our Excel application. And here, instead of doing active workbook, which will refer to our current workbook, I'm going to refer to my workbooks collection. And here we can point to the workbook. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to provide the name of the workbook I want to target, which is book 3 as the name of the workbook. That's one of the open workbooks. And inside of that workbook, again, I will say which worksheet I want to target. You can either go by the name of the worksheet, or again, you could just choose the active one. Let's just go by the name. So I'm going to go Sheets, and the name of that worksheet, if you look in the background, is Sheet 1, which is exactly what I'm going to write here. And inside of that Sheet 1, I'm going to use cells this time. 1 should be our A1 cell, and I'll make the value equal to, and I'm running out of space here, 77, something like that. So let's run this while our workbook 2, see, it's the one in front, so that's the active one. So let's see what happens when we run this code. So you should be able to see now, well, maybe I should just clear all of this just so that it's definitely clear what's going on here. It's book 3 and book 2 too. I'm going to clear. Now I'm going to go back to my module and run this module again. And we'll see that most of it is going to happen on our active workbook, because we either said it should be our active workbook or we didn't mention anything, which is again our active workbook, with exception of this line, which writes to the file called book 3. Now remember, that's just the name of the file. So if I save this file as a different name, then I would have to refer to that name here. Hopefully this whole thing makes sense. So this is the way we can refer to different workbooks, different worksheets, different cells or ranges in our spreadsheet. One last thing I'm going to mention in this particular module here is that this dot value that I write here is optional, because the default property for a cell is the value property. So when you don't mention dot value, it will most of the time pick up the value property. So if you want to be specific about that, do that. Otherwise, you could probably just get away by writing this and it would work too. So if you see in code there's no dot value, just know that's the same as dot value. So that's how we can write to Excel cells. Let's now read from Excel cells. So I'm going to create another module here. I'm going to call it read cells. Again, that's our next subroutine. And in this, we're going to read from our worksheet instead of writing to our worksheet. So reading from the worksheet is pretty much exactly the same as writing to a worksheet. It's just basically what side of assignment operator, this equal sign, you're on. If you're on the left side of this equal sign operator, we're basically writing to a worksheet. If you're on the right side of that, we're reading from the worksheet. So let me show you what I mean. If I just copy this line, that is going to be on the left side of this. And again, I don't have to do application here. I'm just gonna do this. Just book 3, see, that's not the active one. Right now, book 2 is the active. Book 3 is in the background. So I'm going to do book 3, sheet 1, cells 1 value. So instead of 1, I'm going to change this. So right now, we already have something in 1, which is 77. I'm going to just change the cell that I'm writing to. I'm going to say third row, the second column. So that should be B3. And I'm going to make this equal to, and I'm largely going to just repeat this line, and this is probably not going to fit very well, so you'll see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to just copy this, paste it right here. I'm going to change this to 1. I basically just kept the same code on the left and right side of this assignment operator, this equal sign. And the right side is basically the 1 cell value, which is 1 is A1. And left side is 3 which is third row, second column. So what's going to happen, because this one is on the right side of this equal sign operator, it's going to read from the cell and it's going to get the value, which currently is 77. And the left side, it's going to write to the cell because we're on the left side of this. So if I run this code, see, B3 became the same thing because we read that 77 and we put that same 77 in the other cell. So one thing you could do when your code gets really long like this, so you can kind of see what happens, you can do this underscore and move things to the next line like this. That will basically read it as one line. So when you see this underscore means we basically want to read this next line as the same line as the first line. So if I just erase this 77 from here and go back and rerun this code, we should end up getting exactly the same results. So this brings us to the concept of variables. So what we can do, instead of taking something and directly writing to the other cell, we can first just grab the value of that cell and store it in a variable, which is largely going to be this line over here. So I'm going to copy paste it. So first I'm going to create a variable. A variable is a name you come up with. You just have to make sure the name you choose is not one of the currently used variables in a spreadsheet or function names. And there are no spaces, no special characters in this. So the way you know that something is already available and you shouldn't be using that as a variable name is by just trying to type everything in lowercase, or at least the first character in lowercase. So let me show you what I mean. If I decide to call my variable, for example, rows, if I hit enter, see it capitalized the R. That means I should not be using this as a variable name. I should be choosing a different name. So I'm going to just choose something like num for number. Let's see what happens if I hit enter. See, nothing. It doesn't capitalize it, so I should be fine with this. So I'm going to do num, and I'm going to say it equals to, and I'm going to basically just repeat that same code. We don't need two equal signs like this. So because now this is on the right side of the equal sign, it should go and get the value from cell A1, which is 77, and it should store it in this variable called num. Now with this, I can now use that variable in my code. So one thing I could do, I could play around with that variable in my code and then write it back to the spreadsheet. So I could take that num and create yet another variable. I'm going to call it x, for example. That's a common variable name, I guess, in math people like to use. And I'm going to say x should be our num1 plus 2. Not num1, but num. But anyways, this number, this variable, is going to be 77 at that point. So we're going to take 77, we're going to add 2 to it. It's going to make it 79. So x should be equal to 79. So at this point, we can now write it back to our spreadsheet. So we can again do workbooks and refer to the workbook we want to write to. So book 2, actually that's book 3, but you could also write to book 2 as well, as long as it's an open workbook. Sheets, so we'll do the name of the worksheet. And then I'll do again cells object. And I'll make something like 10th row first column dot value equal to that x variable. So if I run this code, I got an error. I probably misspelled something. Yep, of course I did. So it's workbooks, not worksbooks. There it is. So one thing you should know, so if you run a code and it gives you this error, see this yellow line, that means it's still in execution mode. So it's probably best to just reset this after you fixed your error and run it all over again. We'll talk about debugging and everything else later on in more detail. But for now, I'm just gonna click here, run this, and see we have 79 now in that cell. And because that book 3 in the background is my current active workbook and sheet 1 is my current active worksheet, I could replace this code with this. I could remove these references to workbook and worksheet, and the same thing here. And now because this is much smaller code, I could move this to the same line and remove that underscore. And the same thing here, I don't have to prefix it with the name of the workbook and the worksheet because that's my active workbook and worksheet. And the same thing here. So if I did something like this, I'm going to go ahead first and just remove these two numbers here, just keep 77 in A1, go back, and if I run this code, because this is my active workbook and worksheet, this should work pretty much exactly the same way. And you can see it worked. So that's all about writing and reading from Excel ranges and cells, at least for now. Thanks for watching, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.